Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You interview series. It's Gary here again. Thank you very much, as always, for taking the time to tune in to this episode. And today I'm delighted to be joined by coach and counsellor Patrick Eilers, who is here to discuss his 8 dimensions of wellness and what we can all do to further our knowledge of how important wellness is to us. Patrick is a master's level clinician and a licensed professional counsellor in the state of Michigan, and he has been working in the field of psychology since 2016 in various roles, both general and in specialist practices. Patrick has experience in therapy with diagnoses such as anxiety, depression and addiction, and also has the honour to support individuals, couples and groups in life events and relationships. Patrick has also taught to the undergraduate level at both Concordia University and Arbor and Jackson College. And from 2020 to 2024, he worked as a specialist in sexual addiction recovery. During that period, he became a certified life coach and is now embarking on a new journey as a business owner of Bloomworks Concepts and Coaching, stepping into the world of a solo practitioner. I feel your pain, Patrick. And and I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Wellness is, of course, something that's completely relevant for every single person on this planet. Of course, Patrick, thanks very much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah, me too. So I typically like to start with every guest, but just giving an idea of your journey today, your professional journey, your life journey, and more so the key elements that inspired your passion for helping,
Yeah.
people in the areas of wellness and obviously branching out into more general topics in terms of coaching. How did that
Yeah.
go?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was born in Michigan. So I've been kind of a Michigander most of my life, and I grew up kind of in mostly in a city setting. Like when I was real young, then we kind of moved to about right in the middle of like junior high. So like, when I was in junior high, I was like in 3 different grades. So sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, I was at 3 different schools. So that was a pretty challenging time for me in that period. When I got to high school, the biggest thing I think that really kind of started setting out my journey as far as becoming a therapist and eventually, a coach was really, I had a lot of these experiences when there were kind of two things. That's the first thing was a lot of times, I had interactions with a lot of folks I was around in high school where people would just start talking to me about their relationships or about their struggles or about what's going on or whatever. And so kind of was starting at a very early age at that point, really kind of starting to tune in my ear to being able to listen and to be a good listener and to be able to kind of start, fostering that type of experience. And so didn't have a lot of people, as friends kind of growing up. So I was really kind of just drawn to whoever was willing to come talk to me about stuff. And so that was kind of where I started building some of those friendships. The other thing I think that came out of that was just I never really had a tangible interest or tangible talent, so to speak. Like I wasn't like super good at sports or like I really loved this certain area of anything like that. I mean, I did some. My dad always encouraged me to be able to like just try everything and try to check out different things and do as many things I could do as I could in high school. So I did like shop class and I was in journalism, I was in acting, I did all different kinds of things to see kind of what was a good fit for me. And psychology was one of the things I kept kept kind of going through. I did both the intro and like the secondary psychology courses. And I don't have and I've said this in our podcast, I don't have a huge interest in the science of psychology, but I always had the interest of wanting to help people and support people and see people be the best version of themselves, so to speak, in that way. So that kind of started moving me toward that direction. I think very early on, and when I kind of jumped into it in my undergrad, I just sort of kind of knew, going ahead forward, if I was going to do this career, it was going to be a 6-year journey at minimum. Probably more like an 8-year journey, which ended up being an 8-year journey. So I did my 4 years at Spring Arbor University, and that's here in Michigan. It's by Jackson. Then did it there, and then I was out of school for a short period of time between that like summer period. Then I was able to get my master's program at Moody Theological Seminary, Michigan. Wasn't entirely planning to go to Moody, but that's kind of how the doors opened up, and I was able to go there. And so I was able to do that, and then when I graduated, had the opportunity to go. I was looking for a job, and nothing really was opening up. I was, an early clinician. I just came out of school. It was kind of hard to get a job at that point. And I had an opportunity to go to Saginaw, Michigan, which is about halfway up the thumb, if you guys kind of know where that sort of space is up there in the sort of crevice of the thumb of Michigan.
Yeah.
And so being in Saginaw was a real interesting experience. I kind of got thrown into the fire. I mean, I was kind of working with everybody and everything. all ages, all diagnosis. So there wasn't anything specific I didn't work with at that time. The only thing maybe I didn't really work with specifically was large families. I worked with couples, I worked with kids, I worked with adults, I worked adolescents. So got a lot of experience pretty quick, and so I was able to have a lot of experience doing that pretty quickly. And then I had an opportunity to go eventually to a startup practice in Lapeer, Michigan, which is a little further south, closer to Detroit, and got a chance to be there for a little while. And about a year into that, then the pandemic happened, and when that happened, there was a split in the business, and had a chance to go to North Point, which is where I was the last 4 years, and I was working with sex addiction specifically. That was an interesting experience as well, getting a chance to specialize. So, had a lot of, I've worked with a lot of different people, worked with a lot of different, like I said, uh, diagnosis, different age groups, everything like that, and that's some background kind of how I got to where I'm at now.
Fabulous. And in terms of the specialisms that you've had the privilege to work in with the various areas of your practice, were those how did they come about? Were those deliberate for you, where you said, I want to have exposure and experience in each of these areas, or was it something that just kind of opened up and you thought, you know what, why not? Or were you fallen told, so to speak, where
Yeah,
someone says,
yeah.
you go over there and do that?
Well, when I was in school, I never really had, and I noticed one of the questions you'd asked me on the email was like, I did my background when I was at Moody, sort of as my master's thesis was really about focusing on people who were more of retirement ages. And the
Right.
main reason I did that was because there really not a lot of services for folks who are older. So there's a lack of service. So that was kind of really the main goal starting there. When I got into the field, I found that there really wasn't necessarily anybody who, I mean, everybody kind of looks at it and goes, that's a great thing. You want to do that. We support you, but financially we're strapped, right? Either the practice themselves doesn't have the finances, or there's no sort of government program that provides the finances. A lot of times those folks don't have the type of insurance that's going to pay out for being a therapist. So, really that kind of sort of slowed down. I didn't really pursue that too much. When I got to specializing with the sex addiction, it was kind of a combination of just understanding like my own story of like, hey, like, pornography is something that a lot of people pretty much, if you're under the age of 40, you probably navigated at some point, certainly with the internet. And then the other side of that was also just understanding, hey, like this is a need here. And so I was originally hired to work with couples, but then it turned out that I had the opportunity to try to learn more about sex addiction specifically. So I figured, well, I'll give it a try. And like you said, kind of fell into it, at least in the sense of, hey, like I just want to see if this is a good fit for me. And the program is 3 to 5 years long. So it's a long time, recovery program. And so I wanted to give the opportunity to kind of go straight through it, and before I made a judgment if this was a good fit for me. So I knew I was going to kind of be in the long term of it, of continuing to do it. So I did about 4 years of it, and I kind of realized toward the end of the 4 years that I had enough experience of figuring it out that this probably wasn't where I wanted to stay, and that's kind of what started motivating me to move my own business.
So one of the main themes that we're going to be chatting about today is wellness and the, as I mentioned on your bio there, the 8 dimensions of wellness that you work within. What are they? How do they interconnect? Are they for everyone? Is there some exclusivity? How difficult are they to understand? Tell me more.
Yeah. So if you look online, there's the 8 dimensions of wellness is kind of something that is sort of a no. It's like all these different areas in your life, and the way I've described it on previous podcasts is it's like a pie, right? So if you're in the center of the pie, you have all these different pieces of your life, and so just a couple examples of those groupings are financial is one of them, intellectual is one of them, physical is one of them, spiritual is one of them. Um, I'm gonna miss a few, but emotional is one of them. So basically, like there's about 8 of those kind of different areas in our lives. And so what I've found in my experience is that a lot of times, if you think about that pie, when you go to grab a piece of it and you pull a piece of it out or you move a piece of it, the whole pie is affected by that. And so one of the reasons why I think it's important to look at the dimensions of wellness is that it's about balance. And so really we want all these pieces of our lives, not necessarily to have equal parts of ourselves. I wouldn't say like we're giving up like, a percentage of myself to my emotional part, or my part of myself to my physical part. It's like it's more about trying to make sure that each of those areas are addressed and they all have sort of a good balance to them. And so what ends up happening is I've found that a lot of times where people will neglect 1 or 2 areas, maybe 3 areas of their pie, and they'll just sort of try to live out with the rest of those other things overcompensating for those other 3 areas that are sort of out of place. And so what ends up happening is there's a lack of balance in their life. And so those lack of balances tend to create a lot of those symptomologies that we always talk about, right? The depression, the anxiety, the other types of things. Now, this is more so for the kind of everyday person, which is really more of where what they would call like the worried well in our field. And that's like the person who's struggling with the kind of natural stuff that happens for all of us. Now, granted, there are diagnoses out there that still are affected by some of these things, but the majority of this is for folks who are typically struggling with the everyday kind of things that happen in their life, the stress of life, the anxieties of life, those kind of things. And so this pie is really about trying to find that balance and being able to recalibrate that balance when we need to, because there's a lot of times it gets out of balance and we don't even really recognize it. So part of this whole idea of the pie is to try to find ways to find balance for yourself, be able to recalibrate that balance, and then being able to maintain that. So, okay, hey, like this area of my life's kind of getting a little unbalanced. I need to address that. And then, so you can continue to have the tools to do that and maintain it yourself.
Yeah. And in terms of the eight slices of the pie, is it fair to say that every human being has their own unique combination of the eight slices? Or is there certain circumstances? And the reason I'm asking is that you mentioned earlier the word neglect. If you
Mm.
neglect one, two, three, however many areas of that's going to be more difficult to be wholly well
Right.
in your life. Is it knowledge of the eight and then purposeful neglecting of it, or is it a lack of knowledge of the fact that there is eight
Mhm.
and I didn't really know that this was really part of my emotional or life makeup? I'm just interested. Does everyone have the eight and it's just at different sizes of the slice?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that probably everybody has some form of the eight, right? So again, those all look probably a little differently. So, for example, somebody who, let's say you're a CEO of a business, your financial pie may be piece of that pie may be greater than maybe somebody who's, not a CEO or doesn't have that role in their life. I think the one that I could think of that probably most stands out would be like a physical part, right? So we all know kind of throughout universally through our society that if we don't take care of our physical health in some form or another, whether we eat better, we exercise, whatever, that we're going to end up having some types of circumstances or consequences from that. So if you think about that being part of your pie, if that part of your pie is real narrow and it's not addressed, it's going to definitely have an effect on the rest of your life. Your financial, because you're going to spend money on your bills and things like that for your health. Your intellectual is going to suffer. There's a kind of a cascade of responses to that. So really, I think that the pie, like I said before, it's not necessarily about balancing every one of those pieces as much as I think is it's about finding the right combination of those balances so that you can be able to have balance in your own life. Like I said, different roles are going to have different slices of the size of the pie depending on their circumstances and what role you're in. So, but I do feel like they are universal across the board. Everybody kind of has a similar type of. You might call them different things, but they're all sort of in the same category.
It reminds me of my training, my coaching training back in the day through the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. Quick plug for IPEC, and that it was the reason I picked and selected that particular course training was it was around seven levels of energy, and the fact that
Mhm.
everyone has their own unique combination of the seven levels of energy, both catabolic and anabolic. Then, so in terms there's kind of two things I want to concentrate on here. One would be the education of clients that you're working with, both past and future, that there are indeed these eight dimensions of wellness that you need to create some awareness around, that you need to be able to evaluate how they work or not for you at a given point in time. And then the second part is people evolve. So something that could be say for example a perfect fit for them for right now in their late 20s, early 30s, as they grow in their lives, there might be some misalignment there because certain things become less important, some things become more important. Do you see that? Do you see that evolution and how do you support your clients through that natural evolution?
Well, the first part, I think one of the big things, and this is something I developed, with help of, we talk a lot about AI these days. This is something that AI helped me to develop was develop a wellness assessment. So the way I first started out is to give people kind of that, basically a model of what we just talked about, right? Kind of an octagon of the pieces of the pie, and then give them a wellness assessment. The wellness assessment now essentially is a self-report, like it's 1 to 10 scale. Like how do you feel you're doing in each of these sort of areas? I think there's five in each of the categories. And so the idea there is that, it's gonna be pretty obvious to them or pretty obvious to the coach, pretty quickly to go through what numbers are probably low, what numbers are high, why did you pick this number being here versus somewhere else, that kind of thing. Once you kind of get a sense of that, it kind of helps you identify the ones that maybe are current problem areas, right? Those are current, slices of the pie that sort of are out of balance. But I think you make a good point though. Like, how does that then translate later on? Like, I think ultimately it has to come down to a couple things. And the one that I really think of is, like you mentioned, kind of 20s to 30s. And then as you get older, the one part of the pie that might really be affected is your social life. Is your social life pie going to probably shrink? It probably will, especially if you have a family and those kind of things, you're married, whatever the case might be. But I do think it's important that, okay, just because that pie gets smaller doesn't mean that, or that piece gets smaller doesn't mean that the other parts may not, sort of again compensate for that, and the fact that those are other areas that are going to grow. So it's important, I think, to recalibrate. Again, maybe it's something you do. When people make New Year's resolutions, they take a reevaluation of their wellness assessment. I do have the wellness assessment on my website. It's available to people, so if they're interested in that, you certainly can purchase it. And it's, again, pretty self-explanatory of it being kind of a reflection of your own opinions of those pieces. So I think it can change, and I definitely would say, your question is how to support that. I think part of supporting it is helping a person acknowledge that recalibration doesn't mean to destroying the whole pie. Sometimes it just means about moving things where you feel more comfortable at 50 years old than where you felt it maybe at 20. And so it's just about kind of finding that, sort of retuning it. You think about like a car, you got to give a car a tune up after a certain period of time. You're just kind of tuning it up a little bit to get it to where it's going to be more effective now for you versus where it would have been in the past.
Yeah, no, I love the suggestion there of tying it to some sort of annual event. The New Year's resolution was the example you provided, and in terms of maybe having your client base say, we all need to tune up. Everyone
Mhm.
needs
Yep.
that regular maintenance and understanding of what's going on under the hood. So pick a date. It could be your birthday, it could be a kid's birthday, it could be a specific date, but spend the time, maybe take the assessment again and figure out what's changed, and it gives you that reflective moment to understand what has worked for you, maybe what hasn't worked quite so well, and then working forward with the understanding
Yeah.
that some tweaks have to be made.
Well, what I like about the assessment too is that they're all open-ended statements. So that's not something that you're going to like ask yourself quite the same question over and over again. It's basically asking yourself, where are you at versus here versus now, in the past. So
Yeah.
I do think that's going to help with some of what you just talked about, right? It's going to help you be able to have more. It's going to mean more to you or differently to you if a different age or different season in your life than it will when you took it the first time, kind of thing. So
Yeah, definitely. So to go back just a wee bit, to kind of move us forward, in terms of the specialisms that you had in your career thus far, with anxiety and depression and addiction, what were there common themes or strategies that you used with clients that you found helpful in managing these conditions that were kind of within the framework of wellness
Mhm.
overall?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the big thing, I guess a couple things I'll say with that is that you're looking at anxiety and depression are kind of sort of something that we all sort of navigate to different degrees. So again, really, I think being proactive in it. And one of the questions I get a lot is, how do I know when I need to enter some type of support, whether it be life coaching or coaching or if it's therapy or whatever. And I think there's really two areas you want to look at. Number one is that how long has it been going on? If it's been going on more than a month, I probably would definitely say that's probably where you're starting to see that. It's also dependent on how impactful it's been, and really certainly the impact of each individual is gonna be different. So I think those are all things to consider when you're sort of exploring what options you have. And again, life coaching and therapy are kind of on the same spectrum. They apply it. They apply trying to seek improvement in different ways. And so on one hand, you have sort of life coaching is supposed to be is helping you kind of future goal focus, and there's not so much as symptomology replacement, if I can think about it that way. Whereas in therapy is more designed to try to look at the past and help you, heal from wounds and things that you've been in your life in the past. Couple different strategies, I guess I'd say. I mean, there's certainly the idea of we talk a lot about it is the idea of grounding. And so grounding is one for kind of you could use for anxiety or depression, but certainly the idea of being able to like go outside or think about some place you really like to go to and use your five senses and just get kind of sort of back into reality. One of the things I found a lot with when I worked with sex addiction is that people tend to be out of reality a lot of the time. They're so focused on what's going to happen, which creates a lot of anxiety. A lot of times they're online, they're comparing themselves. That can create depression. There's so much about like the phone, and I say this a lot, is that the phone is an intimate device with us. It's probably one of the most intimate relationships some people have with some type of object, right? It's not necessarily even with a person. It's an intimacy with an object. And so what ends up happening is the phone goes places that other people are not welcome to go to. It goes to the bathroom, it goes to the bedroom, it goes, in some cases, I've heard people take it to the shower. There's certain places where the phone doesn't need to go. And so from that perspective, again, creating boundaries, and all that's saying is that I'm giving myself the permission to disconnect from the phone in different places, whether it be, I want quiet time for myself for 15 minutes. I put it on silent. If I leave it out of my bedroom, I leave it out of my bathroom. A common thing I've talked to people doing is creating like a garage for it. Get a basket, get some type of thing you can put it in, and that's where it goes when you go to night, when you go to sleep. That's where it goes when you go to the bathroom. That's where it goes, when you don't want to continue to be involved with it. And yeah, the computer is an aspect of it too, but I certainly think the phone has created that access to things even far deeper than the computer can. So really trying to create good boundaries around those kind of things, breaking some of that intimacy of the device, breaking away from some of those other areas that continue to keep you away from being in reality, and helping you to be more focused on kind of what's in front of you, because that's really what's going to help you connect, whether it be your kids, the relationships, your wife, the things you enjoy doing, your hobbies. Those are the things that are going to help you have this balance we were talking about earlier, right? The pie is only going to be balanced if you're able to stay in reality. If you're out of reality and you're somewhere else and your mind's somewhere else, that pie is always going to be out of sync, because it's not going to be in a place where you can actually tangibly react to it. So I think that's a pretty big important thing to consider, is where are you staying in reality, and how are you doing that?
It's so powerful. I love the language you used around that, and the perfect example of the phone. I was literally talking to my son, Leo, about this last night, and the fact that he's coming up for 16 at the time of recording here, and he has basically grown up with a device in his
Yep.
hand, as soon as he could. And he was a bit spaced out with the very first iPad that he got, and then the more he got used to it, the more he got used to it. But we have a rule here that there's no devices in the bedroom, and there never has been.
Yep.
So it's been that natural break, and I don't know how much that serves him. There's probably some nights he goes to bed quite anxious because he hasn't finished a conversation or seen that extra clip or so. But one of the conversations that we've been having over the last wee while has been, how does that make you feel? And the answer in the beginning, because a lot of times, and you'll probably experience this through your therapy and your coaching, a lot of times when you pose a question to a client, it's the first time they've ever been asked that. So if there were any expectations of what the potential response could be, we
Yep.
have to suspend that expectation, suspend any judgment or anticipation around what the answer will be, because they're still processing, thinking,
Mhm.
I don't know. So when I asked her, like, how does it make you feel when you're on TikTok and you're just scrolling and you're doing that 1, 2, because I see him doing it, that 1, 2 second consumption. And his first answer was, I don't know, it doesn't make me feel anything. And it's, that's
Right.
probably not true. So like when you finish a session, if I could call that, where he's got a spare, say, half hour or whatever, and he's scrolling like a madman, then literally and figuratively, that,
Yep.
how do you feel? Do you feel better? Do you feel worse? Do you feel more educated? Do you feel more confused? Do you feel happier? I didn't hear you laughing. I didn't see you smiling. I didn't, and it's just literally, honestly, Patrick, it's just food for thought for him to say,
Yeah.
do things that make you feel good. And if something doesn't make you feel good, think about why it doesn't make you feel good and think about whether you need to actually do it. And if you don't, think
Mhm.
about stopping. You have more power, you have
Yeah.
more information and data, you have more power than you think you do.
Right. No, and I agree with that. And but you bring up a good point though, because I think that's something that people talk a lot about, is the idea that they just like to numb out. And it's the feeling, it's not feeling anything. That's where people really, I mean, that can really be part of where they want to sort of to land in, because when they're not doing that, they're feeling all the things that are coming up. But what I found is that, and this is part of my program I developed, was that I find that people only really know like one, two to three emotions that they can actually label. And it's usually happiness, sadness, and anger. Those are the three big ones. And so there's so many more other emotions that are out there. And if you go and look at, like, even if you go and Google and you look up emotion wheels, I mean, some of those are 3, 4 levels deep of different emotions that describe things and the different colors of where they go and those kind of things. So part of, I think, what we struggle with, and you talked about this earlier, is it's the lack of us being aware or understanding about how deep some of these things really are. And it's the fact that there's so many things we've created as human beings the phone is a great example of that, that help us to stay away from those things. And that's what makes the work challenging as a coach, a therapist, no matter what, is getting people to be able to enter into what they really are looking to enter into, which is really about understanding that part of themselves in a deeper way. Phone keeps you from doing that. And I would say, again, part of that's because that's why there's such an intimacy with that device.
And it's literally what the phone is designed for
Hmm.
today.
Yep.
Sure, it may have been a connectivity device at some point in the past in terms of literally being able to call someone when you're mobile.
Yep.
But now, since it changed to being smart, its job is to suck you in. Its
Yep.
job is to make you feel like you can't live without it. And for the most part, I see that it does a very good job of that too. So out with devices, what other modern challenges do you see people struggling with that has an impact, a negative impact on their overall wellness?
Well, we talked about earlier is kind of that lack of balance. And I think the reason that there's a lack of balance is because there's a lack of focus on what, again, and you see this if you spend any time on LinkedIn, you start to see a little bit of this shift, it seems like, of people getting away from sort of corporate work culture into more of like, I need to care for myself culture. Now, again, I'm worried because I feel like, we tend to go one extreme to the other. So we're probably headed to the other side of the extreme. But it's about kind of finding that middle ground there. And I think it's a balance between, okay, yes, we do have to work, we do have to do those things in order to, provide for our families, provide for ourselves, etc. But we also need to make sure we're providing we also need to make sure we're taking care of ourselves in order to do that. And I think that's really where people tend to struggle with it, is that it's very easy to get into that routine of, hey, I'm just going to go to work, I'm going to come back, I'm going to, again, I'm going to numb out and I'm going to go to sleep, and that sort of cycle of that. And so I think it's important, again, regardless of our relationships, and there's an aspect of that too, but part of this whole idea with the pie is about finding that balance in all those areas. So it's about, finding balance financially. So it means not eating out every night when you have opportunity to to have the money to do it. It's about finding balance with your physical, whether that's exercising, if it's going out for a walk, if it's connecting with nature, there's a physical component there. It's about your social life, having quality relationships, not having quantity relationships. It's about connecting with the other parts of your, whether it be your family or whether intellectual connectivity, meaning go to a museum or learning something or learning a new craft or learning a new skill, whatever it is. They're all like that. And again, I'm not by any means going to tell you that I'm perfect at any of these things by far. I'm not any better at trying to find the balance to it. But I think it's important to address, because the problem is that a lot of these things that come up for us, I know myself included, is that we don't have balance in some of those areas. I don't have the things that I need to have in order to be able to move forward the best person that I could be. And I do think that in order for us to have a society that is fulfilled, I guess maybe flourishing is probably a better word, flourishing. I do think we all need to be able to, be in those healthiest spaces we can be, because it not only makes us stronger, it also impacts other people in a way that helps them be stronger. So I do think there is a component of this that, as we kind of go forward, we are giving back to the society by finding ways of this balance that sometimes a lot of us don't have, especially in Western culture, where I feel like we really struggle with that balance of those things, because we don't value the things that really what we need. We value the things that keep us away from those things. And so a lot of times that's really where I think that balance gets out of place.
Yeah, and very well said. I was just thinking there towards the end of what you were saying, Patrick, that when I came from Scotland to Canada over 20 years ago, now I was very unpleasantly surprised by the lack of holidays that were available for employed people in Canada. And my understanding is it's the same in America, and maybe even a wee bit more strict in America. So I left my previous job, and my memory's fuzzy now, but I think it was, I had 5 weeks annual vacation. We had 15 public holidays, and I could build up and use 2 flex days every 4 weeks. So someone out there can probably write that down and calculate it out, but it was
Yeah.
a lot of holidays. And then I come here, I get my first job, and they say you get 2 weeks, which after a certain period of time might be 3 weeks. And then after an even longer period of time, it might be 4 weeks. And there was just from a, literally from a wellness perspective, in terms of family time, in terms of downtime, I wasn't really sure how that was going to go, because I was used to almost being a wee bit stressed out about saying, how am I supposed to use all these holidays? When am I supposed to actually do my job? That
Yeah.
was Scotland, Gary, and
Mhm.
then coming here and saying, how am I supposed to rest and recoup and recover and have that flexibility and my employment to be able to take those days when I have repairs to do or certain things that come up and such like that. So that was a real shift for me. Now, I don't know, I have no scientific background at all on this in terms of wellness figures between, the UK, between mainland Europe and North America as to whether we do it better or do it worse, we being folks from the UK and such. But it was very, very material. And it was one of the first times that I remember, really putting that correlation of time with my own time management, but my own kind of mental wealth,
Yeah.
really, of saying, I truly don't know how this is going to go. I don't, and I don't think it's had any adverse effect. I've always been energetic, I've always been healthy, I've always just kind of managed within the parameters that were set down. But it was certainly a bit of shock in the beginning. Do you have any experience of that?
Yeah. Well, definitely people getting burned out. I mean, I think you just kind of started, sort of that was the word I heard you say, even though you didn't use that word, was people experiencing burnout. Um, one of the things, especially with like addiction, when I was working in that particular area of the field, a lot of people would the reason that they were acting out, or a lot of times they would engage in pornography or unhealthy or sexual behavior, whatever that looked like for them, it usually came from a place of them not being able to care for themselves, right? They felt like they either were they deserved it. There was certainly an aspect of that they they had worked really hard and that they deserved some type of release. There are people who felt that they were unworthy from having a relationship, so this was as kind of as close as they could get to that. So there's a lot of different things with that, but certainly the idea that, like you said, the more we work, the more we're not machines. I know there's a sort of scientific element. Sometimes we kind of correlate ourselves to being machine-like, and there are some similarities certainly. But the idea that we can somehow just keep outrunning that thing that's chasing us, whatever that is, right? If it's our other responsibilities or whatever's going on, if we're not facing those things, like we're not going to be able to outrun them, and that's usually where addictions and those kind of things start to play into it, because people don't want to be in the reality of what they have to struggle with, whether it be some type of hardship that's in their life for whatever reason, or if it's something that is from work or whatever the case may be. So I do think there is part of that, those eight dimensions, and you mentioned it. I think there is one in there. Definitely, I think I talked about was work. Was your work or work environment, one of those two, and that is a balance. Like that can't be 90% of your pie and 10% everything else, right? So I think that's really where it does have to, again, considering what that looks like for whether to what you do or whether your employment is or where you work, all those kind of things are factoring into that. And you're right. I think burnout is a big part of people not having that balance.
Yeah. And I wonder, even layered either within the burnout or sitting on top of the burnout, is, you know, the literal lack of amount of time to spend the time thinking about the eight elements of the pie and about how
Mm.
we're performing, if I could say performing in each of these elements, and whether that's serving us in our families and our friend circle and our community as we go forward, because you're just working all
Yep.
the time, or
Hmm.
or getting
Absolutely.
prepared to work for next time. So it's a maybe kind of food for thought. So as we chatted about earlier, you have taken that shift into coaching now. With your therapeutic background, you're shifting in to the different kind of vantage point and different
Yep.
and different modality in terms of serving people. What inspired the transition, and how do you see that working with your wellness work as you evolve as a practitioner?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing I think was, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, that when I was growing up, no matter if it was in high schools, undergrad, grad school, whatever it might have been, I never really had a population of people that I loved like working with. I've just kind of sort of been the average everyday person, and I say that in respect because there's certainly a lot of therapists and a lot of people who want to specialize or get into a certain area or whatever the case is, whether it be from their own story or from maybe somebody they knew or whatever the case is, maybe just the population they feel passionate about. It's not that I don't want to see people be helped. Obviously, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I think the biggest thing for me is that a lot of my background has been from, well, like a theological perspective. So when I went to Moody, that's one of the things they kind of teach. The way I've explained it before to people is that every program you go to, And again, I'm speaking mostly from Michigan programs, but any program you go to anywhere in the States or in Canada, same kind of thing, you're going to get a perspective of what that school of thought is. So, like for example, around here in Michigan, there's Western Michigan University is usually a very behaviorist kind of school. Like they're going to teach you how to learn how to be a behaviorist in that way of how to see psychology in that perspective. Now, you may not agree with that particular framework. That may not work for you later on as a clinician, but that's going to be your background. Same with me. I went to a place where the background was kind of like theology and psychology are looking at a lot of the same answers, a lot of the same questions. And so they give you more training in like the kind of therapeutic art, so to speak, not necessarily the background of like, hey, this is why this person might do this thing or whatever. It's a little bit of a different type of a perspective. So for me, I've walked into multiple places where I've been around a lot of, I'll call it trauma, a lot of trauma, and I don't have a lot of trauma background. So for me, I've had to kind of learn through the experience of what that looks like. Now, again, I think that might be a little bit of an overused word these days, but basically things that are traumatic people experience, so that kind of could be anything, but certainly the idea when you're working with severe trauma, meaning that there's been some type of abuse in somebody's life, or maybe they've had a life or death experience, whatever that may look like. That's a different kind of training and different skill set than necessarily somebody who's coming from my perspective. So part of my training, again, part of my training was part of the reason why I wanted to transition. But then the other reason was because I realized that, I want to make a greater impact for people who do have everyday type of things that they're going through. That might be the person who doesn't seek therapy, right? They may struggle and they may have things going on in their life, but they're not in the point where they're going to go to a therapist. So to me, coaching offers that opportunity to be able to do that. And so again, it's about, I talked about earlier, strengthening the individual person to strengthen the ultimate society. And so the whole goal of what I wanted to do was really about, okay, I've done the specialty thing that didn't really necessarily work out the way I wanted to. I've done the starting practitioner thing that didn't really work out well. I've done the general practitioner thing that didn't. So to me, this is much more sitting in what I've always been internally been more passionate for. And so for me, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to move there, is because it was like, well, this seems to fit what I know I can do, what I'm good at, where my skill set sits. And so I think because the field is sort of shifting, I wanted to try to get ahead of that than behind it. My fear was that if I didn't do it within the next couple of years, we're going to be looking at something where now I'm playing catch up instead of trying to be sort of in the forefront of it, or at least where it's starting to shift. And so because of that shift, moving into more of like doing these kind of things with the podcasting, which I really enjoy doing, being able to talk on your own channel, being able to do some of those other kind of things and kind of impact the greater person, sort of not saying greater in the sense that they're greater person, just more people in that sense. That's kind of where I really wanted to land. So that was really what kind of inspired me to transition and move, was because it feels like there's been a shift, and that's kind of really more where I wanted to be, and it fit more of what my skill set is and what my background is.
Do you enjoy it?
I do so far. I mean, you're only 4 months in, so like I'm not in a position you're kind of talking to me like, these clients I've worked with. I really haven't worked. I've worked with some people. I'm working with some people who I've worked with previously. There were some people who came from where I was before, but as far as new clients and people who like are getting this for the first time, and everybody I've talked to since being in my own business, are getting kind of the initial conversations around it. So I'm hoping that's inspiring people that will want to work with me to be able to do more, and I can give you more stories on that down the road. But
Yeah.
right now, because it's been pretty early, it's been I haven't really had a chance to really see too much of that. But I'm excited about it. I do think that I think I'm much more confident about what I'm speaking about. I feel like I'm more confident what I want to do and how it connects with people. So for that perspective, it's been very good, and I'm excited about it.
Excellent. Excellent. So, as you know, this is the Best You podcast, which we talk about, what you do on a regular basis to become or to sustain being the best version of you. So, what does that look like for you, Patrick?
Yeah, I was reading this question. I was like, man, I don't know if I have a whole bunch of examples in this season, just because everything's so kind of all over the place right now. But one of the things I feel like I try really hard to do is just to have what little routine I can as best I can.
Yeah.
Having those stability things I like to do, being able to, make sure I'm eating breakfast every day, make sure I'm having my coffee, make sure I'm, following through on the general basic stuff that I can do in order to kind of have that foundation, and then do things like, definitely, make sure if you're somebody who's, spirit like spiritual practices, doing your quiet time, doing your devotions, doing those kind of meditative type of practices, Journaling is a big thing. I talk about it in a lot of our podcasts. I encourage people, again, to find the journaling that works for them, because a lot of times what we usually think about journaling, it's kind of like a free association where you're just writing whatever comes to your mind. I always encourage people to find a journal that helps you to answer the questions you want to know about yourself, whether that's you're writing your own prompts, if you're finding some other prompt book. There's a book that by one of my professors, it's a mentor of mine. He wrote a book called 52 Seeds, and basically the whole idea is it's like these little essays, and you kind of respond to the little essays. So those kind of practices are really good. I think those are always constantly kind of cultivating who we really are. And then also finding the things that we really enjoy doing, whether that's, the hobbies that we enjoy doing by ourselves, if those are hobbies with other people, if those are social events we can connect with other people, if it's something you like to do as a team of people. Or I know down here in the States, everyone's really popular right now on like pickleball. That's been kind of coming like a everybody wants to do pickleball. So like that's like a hobby that people can do together. So finding those things that help you cultivate you and help you be able to be again, that's a physical thing as well. Like you're able to, physically active. So I think those things are good. Going for walks is really good. Something I try to do when I can. Just those kind of small things, just to kind of start moving me toward the bigger things, which I still have in mind. I just, when I get the chance to start to actually implement those, financially, et cetera, those kind of things, then I can start to move that direction. But those are some things you can basically do. And again, it doesn't cost you, it doesn't cost you to go for a walk. Doesn't cost you, the only thing it costs you is in time. And it's worth it in that sense. So.
Before I let you go, Patrick, where can people find out more about you?
Absolutely. So we have a website. It's a Patreon channel. So basically the Patreon channel acts as the company website. So it's patreon.com/Bloomworks, one word. And so everything on there, people have it. We talked about earlier, the wellness assessment. Got some other stuff on there for, people can access. All the podcasts I'm on, I have free access to those. So there's a free membership, a 10-month membership, and a $20 a month membership. We do live streams, we do some of the other stuff like that. So I'm building it, so it's not, again, fully complete, but it's something we're continuing to work on. So a lot of resources up there. The email is bloomworks, one word, cc@gmx.com. You can email me there if you want to get in touch. Again, I also have a link to on the Bloomworks site at the About section. There's a link to, if you'd like to schedule a 30-minute free consultation, I offer that. So that's available on there as well. Those are probably the best ways. I'm also on LinkedIn, Patrick Eilers, MALPC, clinical supervisor. You can find that on there as well. And those are another way to connect with me.
Excellent. Patrick, thank you very, very much for taking the time to chat today. I certainly learned a lot about balance. I learned a lot about wellness overall, and it was a fascinating conversation. Thanks very much again.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Really appreciate being here. I had a great time. Thanks.
Hello again. Thanks again for tuning in to this episode, and I do hope that you found it valuable and gained some insights. I do have an ask for you. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would absolutely love it if you would connect with me on my socials, and that's at LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Just search for my name and do whatever it is you need to do there to follow me and stay updated with all the latest content, tips, and discussions. And for any more resources that you're looking for, feel free to visit my website, garygillen.com. And while you're there, you can book a free, no obligation 30-minute coaching call directly with me through the site. Whether you're looking to enhance your performance or tackle a new challenge, I'm absolutely here to help you succeed, and I would absolutely love to hear from you. Thanks very much again, and until next time, keep pushing towards your goals and getting better each and every day, my friend.